All right, welcome back to another part in my series on critiquing and editing viewer patches that are sent in to me. This week I had a patch sent in to me from Billy Repko, and he has a patch that he uses in his band, and they play mostly kind of 80s arena rock style stuff. I think he mentioned Whitesnake, Doc and Skid Row, that kind of a sound, so something on the heavy side. And he has 4 snapshots in his sound, as we can see up here. He had clean, heavy, soft lead and lead. So, basically 4 basic tones. Nothing too complicated. As he mentioned to me, he doesn't really like a lot of effects. A little bit of verb, a little bit of chorus, a little bit of delay. Very similar to my approach on things. And so I thought, yeah, this is going to be pretty easy to work with. So what he sent me was, what his request was, that he said he wanted his distorted sound to kind of cut through more. He was overall fairly happy with it, I think, but he wanted it to cut through more as the distortion. He said that his clean sound was just really thin and sterile, I believe were his words. So I thought, okay, well, let me take a listen and see what my first impressions are. So he sent me basically this patch here with a volume pedal and wah at the beginning. I didn't touch those. That's fine. I mean, everybody's going to like a different wah. Most of the wahs in here are going to sound perfectly fine. People will dial those in the way they want. He had a kinky comp set up as a compressor, I believe, which was only turned on for his clean sound. A couple distortion pedals, the Timmy and the Minotaur. He had an Interstate Z amp for his clean sound. It's a great amp model. And he had the Archetype lead, or Archetype, however that's pronounced, for his rhythm and lead sounds. Okay, and he was feeding that into. He mentioned to me that he was actually using an IR, but obviously couldn't send that to me for legal reasons, right? We're not sharing those purchased IRs. So he said this is the cab that he kind of got closest to with the stock cabs, which is the 412 XXL V30. And he had that with the 160 ribbon mic at 4.5 inches, 80 hertz low cut, 11.5 kilohertz high cut, a little bit early reflections. He has an EQ block in here that's not actually active on his clean. I think it becomes active on some other patches, but we'll talk about that in a bit. He has a chorus effect here, a little bit of verb on a parallel path, which he blended in over here, so he has 100% on his mix. A volume block here that I think was brought in to boost some of the lead sounds, and he has his delay. So here's how his patch sounded on clean. I'll just run through a few of his snapshots. Okay, his heavy sound. Soft lead. And the louder lead. All right, lots of fun. My initial reaction was that, these were decent sounds, but there were a few things that I thought, again, in my opinion, I always want to stress that because I don't want it to sound like I think I'm the be-all and end-all of knowledge on tones. I have my own opinions, as does everybody else. But I do think that I could make a few suggestions on here that are going to help it to cut through. But overall, it's usable. Let's start with the clean sound. I did have a little bit of a problem with the clean. And again, it's coming back to what I'm finding with a lot of these patches, is kind of the overuse or misuse of compression, right? Billy mentioned that his sound was sterile and thin when he was playing live. Again, if you notice what's happening is this compressor is cutting off all pick attack out of the note. There's no dynamics left. You might not be able to tell there, but whether I'm strumming soft or loud, there's no dynamics left. I can't control the tone with my fingers anymore, and that is a sign of a compressor that is compressing too much, right? So whether I'm it's just making everything the same volume. So that was a problem for me on that. And I thought without changing much else on his clean, other than messing with the compressor, maybe getting rid of that and turning it into something else, maybe a deluxe comp like I like to use, I can probably improve this sound a lot. So anyways, let's come back over, now that we've looked at his, over to what I did. And so I did just that. On his clean sound, I figured it just sounded too compressed. So I got rid of the kinky comp and I put the deluxe comp on. What happened with that is that I did parallel compression. If you remember from my last video with Anton, I did a similar thing with him. I pulled the mix back, so it's still letting some of the clean sound, unaffected, uncompressed clean sound breathe through in a more natural way, and the compression is mixed in there to kind of give it that control slightly to the dynamics. So I have 4:1 ratio, 5 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release, minus 21.5 dB threshold is just what I found for this guitar, and my playing style worked. So again, you know, Billy may want to tweak these to his particular style, a few dB either way. One thing I noticed was when I changed the compressor, I had to turn the Timmy off because it just sounded almost too distorted for a clean. I don't mind a little bit edge to my clean sounds, especially if you're playing in kind of an 80s rock band. You know, the pristine crystal cleans, I guess there is some place for it, but sometimes you want maybe even a clean tone that's going to cut a little bit more. But I found it got a little too distorted because the compressor wasn't pulling so much of the volume back that now it was hitting the distortion harder. So it was almost like an overdriven sound now. So I pulled that off, and I brought the verb mix down a little bit here. Billy had that at minus 7.2, and I brought it down to minus 8.8. Subtle change. I mean, again, he could bump that right back up and it's fine. I tend to not want it so wet, just for the simple fact that, again, if you're finding your tone is not cutting through in a mix, adding more reverb to it is going to soften that and give the impression of it being pulled back in the mix. So again, that's not a huge change though, and I don't think it was a huge problem with his sound, just something I reacted to, and you know, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's going to be personal preference again. As far as amp settings though, what I did do, I turned the Timmy off, and I moved his drive setting from 4.5 down to 3, his bass from 4.8 down to 3. His treble, I went from 5.3 up to 6.4, give it a little more clarity. And then the channel volume I had to adjust from 6.7 to 9.3 just to, you know, balance everything out. Everything else stayed the same. And yeah, okay. One other thing I did do though on all of the patches, not just the clean, if we go back to Billy's sound here, he had a single cab, as I mentioned, with the 160 ribbon. I changed that into a dual cab with the mono EQ after it is going to collapse those two to mono, so we're not going to have that left-right stereo thing, and then we had our stereo effects after. So we still got that cab collapsed to mono, which is important. It's not going to be one cab on the left and one cab on the right, like we discussed in the previous videos on my tone series. So I kept basically the first cab exactly like he had it. No problem. It sounded good to me. But I added in another cab with a 421 dynamic with a high cut at 11.7 kilohertz, but I only blended that in to a minus 15 dB just to give it a little bit of that edge. This is the 80s metal sound we're looking for. A ribbon mic might be a little, on its own, might be a little bit too warm sounding for that and might not get the cut. So I threw that in and blended it to how I thought it would sound best. And then everything else was pretty much left the same. So here's the sound that we ended up with. Let's compare that to Billy's sound. Do you hear the compression difference? It's really squashed here. That pick attack gets sucked down right away. And the harder I hit it, it doesn't breathe through. Here's the edited sound. Okay, so I think that sounded a lot better. And actually, Billy got back to me and he says, I really like what you did with the deluxe comp instead of what he had on there, which was the Kinky comp. And he also mentioned to me that in all the sounds, one thing he really liked was the addition of the second cab in and blending that. Which again, if anybody has more questions about that, I did a whole 2 videos on the stock cabs in my other series. So check my YouTube channel for that if you're interested in watching my thoughts about those. Yeah, so he was pretty happy with the way that all came out as far as the cleans go. So then we move over to his heavy snapshot, okay, which is his general all-purpose kind of. Let's get that set so it can switch back and forth. His general all-purpose rhythm guitar tone that he's going to use for the bulk of these songs, right? So what he had here is no EQ block added in. And one of the changes I made was I added that back in on mine, just to give it, and what are the settings on that? He had the 4.7K boosted up at around 1.3 dB. I backed it off to 0.5. Subtle difference. Everything else is the same. Little bit of low mids pulled back. A little bit of boost in the low. Tiny boost in the higher mids. Just to give it that little bit of polish. So I turned that on, I believe, on all of his heavy presets. And he had, I think, just that turned on just the leads before. But again, subtle difference. Not going to make or break the tone, but something that I thought kind of worked nicely in there. Okay, what else here? Okay, so the main thing I did with his heavy sounds, this is my first impression of them, is they were just too heavily distorted, too saturated. And I think that's why he was having a problem with maybe them not cutting through as much. We got to remember something with distortion sounds is that once we get to a point of too much distortion, we get the opposite effect of what we're looking for. The more distortion we have, the more it's like putting a compressor on, right? We're going to start losing definition in the pick attack. The sound is going to be oversaturated. It's not going to cut through as much, and we're not going to be able to have as much dynamics in our playing. So this was Billy's original heavy sound. Okay. Totally usable the way it is, but he just felt like it could have a little bit of an improvement. And I made subtle changes here. Well, I made big changes on paper, it looks like, but the sound is going to be a subtle change. What I did is I automatically went, other than the EQ block thing, and I turned all his distortion pedals off. Now, that might seem like a bit of a bold thing to do. I kind of have always been the type of person who likes to hear the sound of amp distortion. And like I mentioned in one of my first tone videos, I really try to treat the Helix as if it's a real world amp and not models. I'm gonna just run on faith here and think Line 6 did a great job modeling this amp, therefore I'm going to use it like a real amp. That's my train of thought, because I feel they have done that. They've made an incredible unit here and they have some amazing amp models that sound incredible. So, I've always been the type, even back in the day when I was using tube amps. I've gone through many different tube amps. I played Buddha amps for a long time before they were owned by PV. I've played Marshalls, I've played Dr. Z's, I've played a whole pile of different tube amps. And the only time I ever used distortion pedals or overdrive pedals is when, for instance, when I was using Dr. Z amps for a while, I needed that because they were very clean amps. So if I wanted, there was no real dirt channel on a Maz 18 or a Maz 38. With the Buddhas, they had two beautiful channels, and I just never put an overdrive pedal on because I loved the sound of the overdrive out of the amp. It just always sounded better to me. And again, my personal opinion, right? So I thought, since he's using an amp here that does have a lot of gain, let's just try to go to the amp for all the gain. See how that works out. So I turned the distortion pedals off, and I made some adjustments to his settings. So for the heavy sound, what I did is I bumped up the drive channel, the drive parameter, sorry, from 5.1 up to 6. His presence, I brought from 2.7 up to 4.2. Channel volume, almost the same, 7.9 to 8, just to balance the volumes out. And I turned his master up to 6.5 from where he had it at 5.1. Other than that, nothing changed. Okay, so other than I changed the cab, like we talked about before, but I got rid of the distortion pedal. There's no compression on this, and we ended up with this sound. Let's compare that to the tone that Billy had. Back to my tone. So you can notice there's less gain. There's less gain, and I was a little concerned about that. And actually, one of Billy's bit of feedback to me is he really liked a lot of the changes, but he found that, and again, it's his guitar, his pickups, his playing style. So I can't dictate that for somebody. But he even admitted, he says, I didn't realize that the gain was getting away from me again like that. And he says this was an eye opener just because he said he tried to be really conscious of that in his response to me, that he didn't always put too much gain, but he says it happened. And you know what? I know it happens to all of us, and it can easily happen to anybody. Sometimes when I'm working in the studio, I'll be doing the same thing. It's so easy to reach for that gain knob and keep adding more, but then you get to this point of diminishing returns where you go, I'm actually causing the exact problem I'm trying to avoid. I'm not getting more cut. It's not cutting through any better. It's mushy and sloppy now, So there's a fine line. We've got to get it to that point where we have enough gain, sustain, and power to the sound. But once we surpass that, we get into that mushy territory where it's compressing the pick attack a little more. And so there's not a giant difference between our two tones here, but a little less gain. I think there's a little more dynamics in it. Billy did say he added a little bit more distortion with one of the distortion blocks, less so than he had before, which is great. It's got to match his pickups and his playing style, and he's got to be happy ultimately playing it. So that's the one big change I made there. Now, likewise, for all of the soft lead and the more louder lead settings that he had, basically what happens with those is that the delay gets turned on. And I think I noticed I adjusted the delay feedback from 26 down to 23. I don't know if I did that accidentally and in playing around and didn't set it back normal. That's going to be a really subtle change. Regardless, here's Billy's, what he calls his soft lead. Let me just get these so I can switch back and forth with them. So here's was his. And here was mine. So again, you might say, well, what was the change? If you notice, there was less distortion overall, but there was still a lot of power. There was more picking dynamics. I think it's going to cut through better. But again, that's my opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean that's correct. Somebody else might like it better the other way, and that's fine. Basically, the only change I made on the amp settings is the original amp settings were 5.1. These are 7.0 on the drive, and the master went from 5.0 up to 7.0, and I turned the distortion blocks off. The distortion blocks just basically I wasn't using. I left them in there because I knew Billy might want to. I'm not going to just go clear the blocks out and say, no, you can't use those anymore. It's not for me to say. I just turned them off, and if he wants to add them back in, that's wonderful. And then similarly for his more aggressive lead, same thing, distortion's off, but you'll notice here the settings on the amp went up now, the drive to 8 and the master to 7.2. And any change in the channel volume is just to balance the volumes between these. So where's Billy's sound here? Go back to that. So this was his original tone on that with the distortion pedals instead of the amp. slight thinness to it, right? And again, just a little bit on the edgy side. We'll go over to my version of this. So you can hear again, a little more beef, a little fattier, still going to cut, a little less gain, still lots of gain there though, you know. So that's basically the changes I made on those parameters. I don't think I'm missing anything, but so again, like I said, Billy got back to me on it, and he said, you know, he was happy with it. Like he said, there was a couple tweaks. He really liked the fact that I did the dual cab thing. He said that kind of made it so that he feels like he doesn't have to use IRs anymore, that maybe he's happy with the stock cabs, which was kind of cool. He really liked the clean sound now because of the lesser compression and the different compression settings that I used. Like I mentioned, he said that he felt maybe I went a little too low gain on it. And again, that's just going to be down to personal preference. Like I say, most of this stuff is. And the guitar you're using, right? Lower output pickups, higher output pickups, depends on what you're using. But and again, personal preference, right? So he said he did add one of the, I can't remember which distortion block he said he added back in or how much, but he said he had a little bit of that in, but he did still feel like all those changes added up to something that's going to work quite nicely for him. And that's awesome. Super happy with that. But it was a good patch to begin with, you know, like I said, basically my complaint about it would have been the compression on the clean, maybe a little bit too much drive from drive pedals and a little more amp distortion, going for the overdrive pedal or distortion pedals. That's it though, and maybe slightly less gain, and overall it sounded pretty good. Just so people are wondering, I'm using a Godin Summit Classic. These are with Lawler pickups, Lawler El Rayo pickups in these ones. So just as a frame of reference, if you wanted to look up how the output of those pickups to see how it's interacting with this versus the output of the pickups you would be using as well. One thing I didn't mention, I'm going to try to share all of these on Custom Tone, because I had a lot of requests after the first video to do that. So I'll just put up them under, you know, for this one, Billy rig, Anton rig, Dan rig sort of thing, and then, you know, before, after, edit, or however they are. So they'll be there by the time this video is released. So guys, thank you so much again. I have more of these coming up. I've been getting quite a few requests to do this, and I'm really happy you guys like what I do. Again, I don't want it to come across like I think I'm the be-all and end-all of dialing in tones. I have my opinions about it based off of the experience I've had, and I just try to do my best to get to a point that I think people will enjoy the sound I'm giving them, but I also realize that a lot of it will probably be tweaked too to their liking, and that's fine. That's wonderful. As long as I can even maybe help somebody in the right direction, that's great. So thank you again, guys, for all the support. Please like and subscribe and share the videos to allow me to keep doing these. I'm having a lot of fun and enjoying it. It's a lot of fun to be able to help people out with certain things if they're having trouble with it. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care.